unbelievable effort was made; yet, strange to say, the object of all this vigilance and solicitude continued to be unsatisfactory appeared, in fact, to be positively growing worse. It was certainly very odd. The more lessons that Bertie had to do, the less he did them; and the more carefully he was guarded against excitements and frivolities, the more desirous of mere amusement he seemed to become. Albert was deeply grieved, and Victoria was sometimes very angry; but grief and anger produced no more effect than supervision and timetables. The Prince of Wales, in spite of everything, grew up into manhood without the faintest sign of "adherence to and perseverance in the plan both of studies and life," as one of the royal memoranda put it, which had been laid down with such extraordinary forethought by his father. II Against the insidious worries of politics, the boredom of society functions, and the pompous publicity of state ceremonies, Osborne had afforded a welcome refuge; but it soon appeared that even Osborne was too little removed from the world. After all, the Solent was a feeble barrier. Oh, for some distant, some almost inaccessible sanctuary, where in true domestic privacy one could make happy holiday, just as if, or at least very, very nearly, one were anybody else! Victoria, ever since, together with Albert, she had visited Scotland in the early years of her marriage, had felt that her heart was in the Highlands. She had returned to them a few years later, and her passion had grown. How romantic they were, and how Albert enjoyed them too! His spirits rose quite wonderfully as soon as he found himself among the hills and the conifers. "It is a happiness to see him," she wrote. "Oh, what can equal the beauties of nature!" she exclaimed in her journal during one of these visits. "What enjoyment there is in them! Albert enjoys it so much, he is in ecstasies here." "Albert said," she noted next day, "that the chief beauty of mountain scenery consists in its frequent changes. We came home at 6 o'clock." Then she went on a longer expedition, up to the very top of a high hill. "It was quite romantic. Here we were, with only this Highlander behind us, holding the ponies, for we got off twice and walked about. We came home at 11:30. The most delightful, most romantic ride and walk I ever had. I had never been up such a mountain, and then the day was so fine." The Highlanders, too, were such astonishing people. They "never make difficulties," she noted, "but are cheerful and happy and merry, and ready to walk and run and do anything." As for Albert, he "highly appreciated the good breeding, simplicity, and intelligence which make it so pleasant and even instructive to talk to them. We were always in the habit," wrote Her Majesty, "of conversing with the Highlanders, with whom one comes so much in contact in the Highlands." She loved everything about them: their customs, their dress, their dances, even their musical instruments. "There were 9 pipers at the castle," she wrote, after staying with Lord Breadalbane. "Sometimes 1 and sometimes 3 played. They always played about breakfast time, again during the morning, at luncheon, and also whenever we went in and out, again before dinner and during most of the dinner time. We both have become quite fond of the bagpipes." It was quite impossible not to wish to return to such pleasures again and again; and in 1848 the Queen took a lease of Balmoral House, a small residence near Braemar in the wilds of Aberdeenshire. 4 years later she bought the place outright. Now she could be really happy every summer; now she could be simple and at her ease; now she could be romantic every evening, and dote upon Albert, without a single distraction, all day long. The diminutive scale of the house was in itself a charm. Nothing was more amusing than to find oneself living in 2 or 3 little sitting rooms, with the children crammed away upstairs, and the Minister in attendance with only a tiny bedroom to do all his work in; and then to be able to run in and out of doors as one liked, and to sketch, and to walk, and to watch the red deer coming so surprisingly close, and to pay visits to the cottagers. And occasionally one could be more adventurous still: one could go and stay for a night or two at the bothy at Alt na Giuthersach, a mere couple of huts with a wooden addition, and only 11 people in the whole party. And there were mountains to be climbed and cairns to be built in solemn pomp. At last, when the cairn, which is, I think, 7 or 8 feet high, was nearly completed, Albert climbed up to the top of it and placed the last stone; after which 3 cheers were given. It was a gay, pretty, and touching sight, and I felt almost inclined to cry. The view was so beautiful over the dear hills, the day so fine, the whole so gemütlich. And in the evening there were sword dances and reels. But Albert had determined to pull down the little old house and to build in its place a castle of his own designing. With great ceremony, in accordance with a memorandum drawn up by the Prince for the occasion, the foundation stone of the new edifice was laid, and by 1855 it was habitable. Spacious, built of granite in the Scotch baronial style, with a tower 100 feet high and minor turrets and castellated gables, the castle was skilfully arranged to command the finest views of the surrounding mountains and of the neighbouring River Dee. Upon the interior decorations Albert and Victoria lavished all their care. The wall and the floors were of pitch pine, and covered with specially manufactured tartans: the Balmoral tartan in red and grey, designed by the Prince, and the Victoria tartan with a white stripe, designed by the Queen, were to be seen in every room. There were tartan curtains and tartan chair covers, and even tartan linoleums. Occasionally the Royal Stuart tartan appeared, for Her Majesty always maintained that she was an ardent Jacobite. Watercolour sketches by Victoria hung upon the walls, together with innumerable stag's antlers and the head of a boar which had been shot by Albert in Germany. In an alcove in the hall stood a life-size statue of Albert in Highland dress. Victoria declared that it was perfection. "Every year," she wrote, "my heart becomes more fixed in this dear paradise, and so much more so now that all has become my dear Albert's own creation, own work, own building, own layout; and his great taste and the impress of his dear hand have been stamped everywhere." And here, in very truth, her happiest days were passed. In after years, when she looked back upon them, a kind of glory, a radiance as of an unearthly holiness, seemed to glow about these golden hours. Each hallowed moment stood out, clear, beautiful, eternally significant; for at the time every experience there, sentimental or grave or trivial, had come upon her with a peculiar vividness, like a flashing of marvellous lights. Albert's stockings, an evening walk when she lost her way, Vicky sitting down on a wasp's nest, a torchlight dance: with what intensity such things, and 10,000 like them, impressed themselves upon her eager consciousness! And how she flew to her journal to note them down! The news of the Duke's death! What a moment when, as she sat sketching after a picnic by a loch in the lonely hills, Lord Derby's letter had been brought to her, and she had learnt that England's, or rather Britain's pride, her glory, her hero, the greatest man she had ever produced, was no more. For such were her reflections upon the old rebel of former days. But that past had been utterly obliterated. No faintest memory of it remained. For years she had looked up to the Duke as a figure almost superhuman. Had he not been a supporter of good Sir Robert? Had he not asked Albert to succeed him as Commander-in-Chief? And what a proud moment it had been when he stood as sponsor to her son Arthur, who was born on his 81st birthday! So now she filled a whole page of her diary with panegyrical regrets. His position was the highest a subject ever had, above party, looked up to by all, revered by the whole nation, the friend of the sovereign. The Crown never possessed, and I fear never will, so devoted, loyal, and faithful a subject, so staunch a supporter. To us his loss is irreparable. To Albert he showed the greatest kindness and the utmost confidence. not an eye will be dry in the whole country."